The time zone is 11 hours, and it's 6 o'clock in the morning probably in Delhi from where I came yesterday. So I've stayed up the whole night. I'm Barun Mitra from Liberty Institute, New Delhi. The thing that
Somebody, do you want to come help with? It's just not recognizing the drive. So. No, it's not recognizing the key drive. So.
Basically, I wanted to highlight, firstly, there's a qualification which I tend to give anywhere where I'm kind of invited to speak, because unlike this panel, or unlike most panels in this conference that I attended so far, I'm perhaps least qualified to speak to anybody like you. I'm not an expert on any of the issues. I dabble in many, many issues. And as a public policy advocate, I kind of believe that I don't have to be an expert on any issue, because what we are discussing affects the public, affects all. And in an open society, we should ensure that more people can participate in the discussion so that there is a reasonable understanding and a reasonable decision-making that can take place. And secondly, what I wanted to highlight was not so much of theories or macro data statistics. I thought maybe it will be better if I share with you some of the stories that I can get from India, and maybe you could tell me whether my interpretation of those stories are right or wrong. The starting point of all this that I came to was, we have heard today, and I'm sure we have been hearing it for a decade at least, the price of energy in the broad sense that it includes, or it ought to include, the environmental costs, the social costs, etc. To me, the whole thesis today is that there's a cost for lack of energy, and we really need to factor that in. There are half the world and more where energy is not in as abundance as in this country or some of the other richer countries, and there is a cost to that too. And we really need to understand both costs if we are going to come up with any sensible decision. I'm going to look at the three sectors from India: transportation, energy, and health. And I'm going to highlight that how those costs are not insignificant. 2008 was the year when Model T made its mark in this country, and basically made mobility for the masses possible. 1908, rather. 100 years later, in 2008, we have had a new Indian car that was released in January, which is supposed to hit the markets by October. And there's been a lot of speculation as to what this might entail. Just think, what would happen if Chinese and Indians could have as many cars as every family has in this country? This is the kind of basic figures that I found. In the United States, there are 700 vehicles for 1,000 people. In India, there are 7. What are the policy prescriptions that have been generally presented over the years? That we need to tax the fuel and the vehicle. We need to have tariffs. We need to promote public transport or mass transport. And we in India seem to have followed quite a few of those prescriptions for quite some time. We have one of the highest taxes on fuel. We have one of the highest taxes on vehicles. And we have one of the highest taxes on tariffs. We in India for the last 40 or 50 years have done our best to try to reduce mobility of our own people. Now, should we be congratulated and the ICCC1 FCC congratulate us and award India for halting mobility? Or should we condemn ourselves for this folly? This is how India is, and I'll run through some pictures which probably will be more eloquent. This is an advertisement from the government of India. Girls gaining by learning to bicycles so that they can go to higher schools and colleges, which might be 5-10 kilometers away from their villages. This is quite common. Those of you who have been to India would see animal power is a significant source of traction in our countries, and not just in India. It's there in China. It's there in much of Africa. This is in Delhi. This is real. These are not fancy vehicles that you see in New York around the Central Park where you have coaches carrying tourists around. These are animals and carts which do real economic business. This is how a vehicle is loaded, and this is how they travel. This is not uncommon in many parts, not just in India, but many parts of the poorer countries. Who's paying the price? Obviously, with this kind of cost structure, the older vehicles predominate. In Delhi, an average age of a vehicle is 10 to 12 years. In other parts of the country, it's 15 to 20 years. Congestion in bigger cities and small, 25% of the fuel is wasted because either the roads are blocked or roads are in such poor condition that you can't move easily. 100,000 traffic deaths, among the highest in the world. 100,000 people lose their lives annually, most of them outside the vehicle, because most of the country are pedestrians. Reduced mobility has some unusual costs. 25% of fruits and vegetables produced in India is wasted before it can reach the market, because with animal carts, you can have a reach of 10, 15 kilometers at best. With a kind of a truck, you could probably raise it to 50 to 100 kilometers. With a refrigerated trucks, you could probably raise it to a few hundred kilometers. These costs are not small, and in poorer countries, they simply amplify, because if you are poor, 50% or more of your family income is going to go on food. And if 25% of the food is wasted even before it reaches the market, it's not a very easy situation. Price of oil, I'll just skip that because I found it quite interesting, because we are supposed to, on 27th April or February, the oil price probably reached the historic high of 1980. But we are so concerned with oil price. The situation in many other parts of the world is not oil, it's traditional energy. Traditional energy meaning agricultural waste, firewood, cow dung, could be anything that can be burned. And the proportions can be huge. And these are UN estimates, and my belief is, at least from what experts have told me in India, that in India, anything between 30 to 40% of energy is coming from what's called traditional non-commercial energy. That is the agricultural waste, firewoods, twigs, or cow dung. Cow dung is actually, it's called non-commercial, but it's an extremely commercial form of energy, particularly for domestic kitchen in rural households. This is common, the three pictures, one comes from India, another from China, another from Bangladesh. It's very common that these, I think Kendra mentioned this in the morning, the traditional fuel comes with its own cost. Part of that cost, the WHO says, 2 million people every year die because of pollution caused by burning such fuel in unventilated or badly ventilated rooms or huts. In India, the death rate is estimated at 600,000 or more. There was a huge study done in 2003 by an economist and an organization in Bombay. They surveyed about 50,000 households in North India. And they found, these are the figures, some of the figures that they found, that 5% of adult females suffer from some forms of respiratory diseases. 90% of households in small villages rely on fuels like these. And more significantly, 88% of population use these fuels for their daily cooking. These are enormous. This is the actual result of that study in 2003. Think of these figures. How many times do we hear of this? This is lives lost today. This is not 50 years down the road when climates might change. This is not 100 years down the road what IPCC and UNFCCC is planning for. This is today. And we really need to ask ourselves that until and unless we can tell our own people that we are trying to help them take care of their present, we cannot ethically, morally, economically ask them to take care of their future 50, 100 years down the road. These are kind of a very interesting index that this study produced. It actually kind of weighs the various fuel in terms of their health impact. And you see the traditional fuels are right at the top in terms of their health impact. And the modern fuels, such as electricity or kerosene or liquid petroleum or light gas, are right at the bottom, which is natural, which is why countries like United States and the other richer countries, they all rely on the modern forms of fuel at the bottom of this table. Electricity, my last example, I think. This is a very big problem, even in cities like Delhi. Those of you who have been, we have traditional car shortage of about 10 to 15% of daily demand. Across the country, it's worse. There are districts and villages which get electricity by the day. They get it on one day, then they don't get it for 2 days and get it back 2 days later. These also come with a price, enormous price. I already mentioned the agricultural waste, but look at the other two wastes. 50,000 Indians, when I discovered this figure, I myself was shocked, and I live in India. 50,000 Indians die of snake bites each year, and that is because the antivenom can't be stored without refrigeration, and refrigeration requires electricity. Most Indian primary health clinics across the country would have no electricity to run refrigerators. Likewise, 20,000 from dog bites. Rabies vaccine can't be stored. That's the price that people are paying today. Lighting, and this is again, the lantern is a very common form of lighting even today. And you have this CFL, and some of the countries are actually, the compact filament at the bottom end there. Some of the countries, Australia, and perhaps in the United States too, there's discussion about making it mandatory to switch over to some of the more efficient forms of lighting. Firstly, you need to ensure electricity so that you can switch over to something else. And secondly, I looked at this compact filament some 5-7 years ago in India, like the taxes and tariffs on oil. Compact filament, when they came in about 10-12 years ago, India had a tax regime of 80 to 100% on that, which meant that we virtually deterred transition to more efficient forms of energy use. You could, of course, say that by consuming less, we are saving the environment, but we are paying the price. This is the household electricity energy consumption. You can see the share of the non-commercial versus the share of electricity. About 40% or 50% of households have no electricity connection. So what we need to do is, that we have this debate over adaptation versus mitigation, and we have this policies of taxes and tariffs, and protectionism is growing in one form or the other. But the answer would be, I think, the key point would be we cannot afford to focus on cutting or reducing consumption. It is consumption that holds the key. And which is why I think in countries like India, China, Africa, it would be politically suicidal for any establishment, whether it is democratic prime ministers in India or communist leaders in China, to even conceivably say that they are going to reduce energy consumption. It's impossible. Per capita energy consumption in China and India is 1/10 or 1/20 of what is in this country. It will be suicidal, particularly given the price that people are paying today. And this is what we should really look for, that if we improve consumption, we stimulate demand. If we stimulate demand, we are going to encourage rather than discourage the new technologies and the new changes that are necessary to improve efficiency. And it is efficiency that is going to help us overcome the challenges of the future. It is efficiency gains that are going to save us from the environmental challenges, not otherwise. And therefore, consumption is the key. All talk of reducing consumption is just talk, unless we really are keen to sacrifice our own people, which I'm sure is not going to happen, at least in my country, China, or most of Africa. No leader would be able to sacrifice their own people. It's very easy to look from the other side and not count the cost. And I would really like all of you to think of the cost that's there on the other side. Thank you very much.